The shock of the ice-cold water hitting Derek's face at 4 in the morning felt like a physical blow to his soul. A freezing wake-up call to a life he no longer recognized. Standing over him with an empty pitcher and a look of pure, unadulterated disgust was Lillian, the woman he had promised to protect for eternity, while her lover leaned against the bedroom doorframe, smirking at Derek's shivering form. Within 3 hours, the house Derek paid for would be filled with Lillian's laughing family, all of them prepared to witness his final humiliation before he was tossed onto the street like yesterday's refuse. Hello, friends. Welcome to Folktales by Mason. It is a pleasure to have you here with us today. If you are new to the channel, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing so you never miss one of our daily stories. We would love to hear from you in the comments. Let us know where in the world you are watching from. Are you joining us from the sunshine of Florida, the streets of London, or perhaps somewhere in Australia or South Africa? We read every single comment. Derek was a 42-year-old man who, until 6 months ago, believed he was the anchor of a happy, upwardly mobile suburban family. He sat up slowly, the drenched sheets clinging to his skin, the water dripping from his chin onto the hardwood floors he had polished himself just last weekend. Lillian didn't offer a towel. She didn't even offer a word of apology. Instead, she checked her watch. A rose gold piece Derek had bought her for their 10th anniversary, and told him that Marcus was hungry. She expected a full breakfast, the kind Derek used to make on Sunday mornings when they were still in love, and she expected it on the table before the sun crested the horizon. Marcus, a man 10 years Derek's junior with the build of a gym rat and the intellect of a paperweight, just chuckled and told Derek not to burn the bacon. The power imbalance in that room was so thick it was suffocating. In their eyes, Derek was a failure, a freelance consultant, who spent too much time in the home office and not enough time bringing in the mid-six-figure salary Lillian's social circle deemed acceptable. Lillian was a high-level marketing executive who had climbed the ladder quickly, and as her status rose, her perception of Derek had plummeted. She saw him as a domestic accessory, a ghost in the house who handled the groceries, the repairs, and the emotional labor while she pursued a life that no longer had room for a man of limited ambition. What she didn't know, what no one in this town knew, was that the consulting work Derek did involve the private management of offshore sovereign wealth funds, and that the quiet man she treated as a servant held the keys to a financial kingdom worth more than the GDP of several small nations. Derek walked into the kitchen, his footsteps heavy and wet, and began to crack eggs into a stainless steel bowl. His hands were steady, despite the cold. He had always been a man of immense patience. You don't manage $50 billion in assets by being impulsive or reactionary. You do it by watching the board, calculating risks, and waiting for the exact moment when your opponent overextends. Lillian had overextended. She had invited her parents and her sister over for a family brunch at 8 a.m., an event Derek realized was actually a staged intervention to force him to sign the divorce papers she had left on the kitchen island. The papers were there, nestled between the toaster and the fruit bowl. Derek glanced at them as the bacon began to sizzle. She was offering him a pittance, a small cash settlement and his car, provided he vacated the property immediately and waived all rights to the appreciation of our shared assets. She assumed he was desperate. She assumed he was broke because he never flaunted wealth, never bought the Ferraris or the designer suits that Marcus favored. To Lillian, money was something you wore and shouted about. To Derek, money was a silent, invisible force of nature. He flipped the eggs over easy, just the way she liked them, while the sound of her laughter echoed from the floor above, mingling with Marcus's deep, arrogant baritone. By 7:30 a.m., the house began to fill with the sounds of arriving guests. Derek's father-in-law, Arthur, a man who had never liked him because Derek didn't play golf, walked into the kitchen and didn't even acknowledge his presence. He went straight for the coffee pot Derek had brewed. His wife, Lydia followed behind, clutching her designer handbag as if she were afraid Derek might steal it. They sat at the mahogany table Derek had commissioned from an artisan in Vermont, talking about him as if he were a piece of furniture that had outlived its usefulness. They discussed where Lillian and Marcus would go for their first official vacation once the dead weight was removed. Derek served them in silence, placing plates of eggs, bacon, and toasted sourdough in front of them, playing the role of the broken husband to perfection. "You know, Derek," Arthur said, finally looking at him through his bifocals, "it's better this way. A man should know when he's been outclassed. You've had a good run living off my daughter's hard work, but it's time to let a real provider take the reins." He gestured toward the stairs where Marcus was descending, wearing one of Derek's silk robes. The sight of Marcus in Derek's clothes should have made him flip the table in a rage, but instead, it felt like a final, necessary confirmation. The betrayal wasn't just Lillian's. It was a collective effort by a family that valued the veneer of success over the reality of character. They had no idea that the very ground they were standing on was owned by a shell company Derek controlled, or that the promotion Lillian was expecting at her firm on Monday was contingent on a merger Derek was currently overseeing. Derek stood by the sink, wiping down the counter as they ate. He watched the clock. In the world of high finance, timing is everything. There is a specific legal mechanism known as a reverse piercing of the corporate veil, and another more obscure clause in the prenuptial agreement regarding unattributed capital gains. Lillian thought she was protected because she had kept her earnings in a separate account. She didn't realize that in their state, any debt incurred by a spouse for the maintenance of a lifestyle beyond their means can be reconciled against their separate property during a fault-based divorce, especially when infidelity is documented. And Derek had documented everything. Every dinner Marcus paid for with her credit card, every hotel stay, every disparaging text message sent about Derek's worthlessness. "The papers, Derek," Lillian said, wiping her mouth with a linen napkin. She tapped the legal documents on the island. "Sign them now, and I'll let you keep the furniture in your office. It's more than you deserve, considering you've contributed nothing to this household for 3 years." Her sister, Sarah, smirked and pulled out her phone, likely ready to record Derek's defeat for her social media followers. They wanted to see him crumble. They wanted the satisfaction of seeing the loser realize he had lost everything. Derek picked up the pen, but he didn't sign. He simply looked at the clock. It was 8:45 a.m. "I think there's something you should see before I sign anything," Derek said, his voice low and calm. It was the first time he had spoken since the water hit his face. The room went quiet, not out of respect, but out of curiosity. Derek reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, encrypted tablet. He laid it on the table next to the half-eaten breakfast. On the screen was a live feed of a brokerage account, the numbers scrolling so fast they were a blur of green. He tapped a few icons, navigating through layers of corporate firewalls until he reached a document titled Project Phoenix. If you are still watching at this point, it means you are truly invested in Derek's journey. Please drop a comment with the words, "The tide is turning," so I know who is following along with this shocking story. Truly helps us grow and bring more stories like this to you every day. Now, let's get back to the moment where the room went cold. Lillian leaned in, squinting at the screen. "What is this? More of your little consulting spreadsheets? Derek, nobody cares about your hobby. Just sign the papers so we can move on with our lives." She reached for the tablet to push it away, but Derek caught her wrist. Not hard, but with a firmness that made her eyes widen. For the first time in years, she saw something in his expression that wasn't subservience. She saw the man who had outmaneuvered billionaires in Singapore and Zurich while she was worried about her Instagram engagement. "This is the deed to this house," Derek said, pointing to a file on the screen. And this is the ownership structure of the marketing firm you work for. You've been wondering why the merger with the Sterling Group has been delayed for 6 months. Haven't you? You've been telling your parents that you're about to be a vice president. Derek looked at Arthur, whose face was starting to lose its color. The Sterling Group is a subsidiary of a private equity firm called Valerius Holdings. And Valerius Holdings is a single-family office. Derek paused, letting the silence stretch until it became painful. My family office. I am the sole beneficial owner of the company that is currently deciding whether to finalize your merger or to liquidate your entire department for inefficiency. The sound of Marcus dropping his fork onto the porcelain plate was like a gunshot. Lillian let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. That's impossible. You're a freelancer. You don't have that kind of money. You don't even own a decent suit. She looked to her father for support, but Arthur was an old-school businessman. He knew what a Bloomberg terminal looked like, and he knew what he was seeing on Derek's tablet wasn't a fabrication. Arthur reached for the tablet, his hands shaking slightly, and scrolled through the registration documents. His eyes went wide as he saw the bank balances. Numbers with so many zeros they seemed like a typo. Derek? Is this real? Arthur whispered, his voice cracking. Lydia, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, sat up straighter, her expression morphing from disdain to a terrifying kind of predatory interest. But Derek didn't look at them. He kept his eyes on Lillian, the woman who had thrown cold water on his face at 4 a.m., the woman who had invited her lover into their bed and her family to Derek's execution. It's very real, Derek said, finally picking up the pen. But he didn't sign her divorce papers. Instead, he pulled a different set of documents from a folder he had hidden under the counter. These are my papers. They've already been filed with the court as of 8 a.m. this morning. I'm suing for a fault-based divorce on the grounds of adultery and emotional cruelty. And because this house was purchased through a trust one established long before we met, a trust you signed a waiver for during our engagement because you didn't think it was worth anything. You have exactly 2 hours to remove your belongings. The room erupted. Marcus stood up, trying to reclaim his alpha male status. You can't just kick her out. This is her home. Marcus stepped toward Derek, but Derek didn't flinch. He had already signaled the 2 men parked in the black SUV outside. As if on cue, the front door opened, and 2 professional security guards in understated suits walked in. They didn't say a word. They simply stood by the entrance, their presence making it very clear that the era of Marcus's bravado was over. Lillian was hyperventilating now. Derek, honey, let's talk about this. I was stressed. The work, the pressure. Marcus means nothing. He was just a distraction. We can fix this. Think about everything we've built. She reached for Derek's hand, but he stepped back, the coldness of the morning water still fresh in his memory. Derek looked at the breakfast he had cooked, the bacon cooling and the eggs congealing. It was a perfect metaphor for their marriage, something that looked nourishing on the surface but was actually hollow and cold. You didn't build anything, Lillian, Derek said. You decorated. I built the foundation, the walls, and the roof. You just chose the paint color and then decided you didn't like the man who provided the canvas. Derek turned to her parents. Arthur, Lydia, I'd suggest you help her pack. The locks will be changed at noon. And Arthur, regarding your investment in the golf club expansion, you might want to check your email. The lead investor just pulled out. He didn't like the character of the board members. The realization hit them like a tidal wave. Derek wasn't just leaving. He was dismantling the support structures they had taken for granted. In their greed and arrogance, they had treated the most powerful person in their lives as a servant, never realizing that the hand that feeds can also be the hand that withholds. Derek watched as Sarah, the sister who had been ready to record his downfall, slowly put her phone away, her face pale. There would be no viral video of Derek's humiliation today. Derek walked out of the kitchen and up to his office, leaving them to the chaos he had orchestrated. He sat at his desk and looked out the window at the manicured lawn. For 3 years, Derek had played the role of the quiet, slightly failing husband because he wanted to believe that Lillian loved him for who he was, not for what he had. He had given her every opportunity to be a partner, to be a teammate, but she had chosen status. She had chosen Marcus, and in doing so, she had triggered a series of events that were now inevitable. As Derek heard the first of the boxes being dragged across the floor downstairs, he opened his laptop. There was one more thing to do: the merger. He looked at the final approval document for Lillian's marketing firm. With a single click, Derek could ensure she kept her job, or he could ensure she was part of the redundancy package. He hesitated for a moment, thinking about the woman he used to know, the one who laughed at his bad jokes and made him feel like the richest man in the world before he actually was. But then, Derek felt the phantom sting of cold water on his face. He hit reject. The sound of Lillian screaming started about 10 minutes later, presumably after she checked her work email. It was a raw, primal sound, the sound of a world collapsing. Derek didn't feel joy, and he didn't feel sadness. He simply felt the quiet, steady hum of justice. The clock was ticking, and for the first time in a long time, Derek was the one who controlled the time. The street was quiet when the moving truck arrived, a budget rental that Lillian had to scramble to find. Derek watched from the balcony as Marcus lugged out her designer suitcases, his previous swagger replaced by a frantic, sweating desperation. Marcus wasn't a lover anymore. He was a pack animal, and he was realizing that being with Lillian now meant being with a woman who had nothing but debt and a tarnished reputation. The power Marcus thought he had stolen from Derek was never his to begin with. By 11:30 a.m., the house was silent. The only thing left in the kitchen was the empty pitcher Lillian had used to wake Derek up. Derek picked it up, walked to the sink, and set it down gently. His phone buzzed. It was a message from his lead counsel. The accounts are frozen. The filing is public. The board has been notified. What's next? Derek looked around the empty halls of the house that was no longer a home. He thought about the lessons his father taught him, that true power doesn't need to shout, and that the most dangerous man in the room is often the one who says the least. Lillian and her family had spent years shouting, and now they were finally going to learn the value of silence. The silence in the aftermath of Lillian's departure was not a void. It was a heavy, expectant presence that filled the high ceilings of the house Derek had meticulously maintained. As the sun reached its zenith, casting long, sharp shadows across the driveway where the oil leaks from the budget rental truck remained like scars, Derek sat in the sunroom with a single glass of water. He wasn't celebrating, nor was he mourning. He was simply existing in the space where a storm had just passed, knowing that while the winds had died down here, the pressure system was moving rapidly toward the rest of Lillian's life. By 2 p.m., Lillian's marketing firm, a mid-sized powerhouse that prided itself on its family culture and high-stakes luxury branding, had received the formal notice of the rejected merger. Because Derek had structured Valerius Holdings through a complex web of blind trusts, the firm's board of directors didn't see his name on the rejection letter. They only saw the devastating news. The capital injection they had banked on was gone. The expansion plans were dead. And, as per the feedback from the anonymous lead investor, the firm was being cited for cultural toxicity and leadership instability. Lillian, who had spent the last 3 hours in a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment Marcus had rented in a panic, was staring at her laptop screen in a state of catatonic shock. The apartment smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap carpet cleaner. A far cry from the lavender-scented, 5,000 square foot sanctuary she had just been evicted from. Her phone was buzzing incessantly. It was her boss, the CEO who had promised her a corner office and a seat at the executive table. When she finally answered, there was no preamble. The CEO told her that in light of the failed merger and the specific character concerns raised by the investors, the board had decided to make an example of the leadership team. Lillian was being terminated for cause, effective immediately, citing a breach of the morality clause in her contract that she hadn't realized Derek had influenced years ago during a routine legal audit of the firm's bylaws. If you are still with us and finding this journey into justice fascinating, please take a moment to drop a comment saying, "He knew all along." It helps our community grow and ensures we can keep bringing these stories of triumph and truth to you every day. We love seeing where our audience stands on these turning points. Now, let's see how deep the rabbit hole really goes for Lillian and her family. While Lillian was losing her career, her father, Arthur, was experiencing his own financial vertigo. He sat in his mahogany-paneled study, staring at a series of margin calls on his computer screen. The golf club expansion had been more than a hobby. It was the vehicle Arthur had used to leverage his remaining retirement funds, hoping for a final, glorious payday. But the lead investor, the one Derek had quietly discouraged, wasn't just a partner. He was the keystone. When he pulled out, the bank panicked. Arthur's credit lines were frozen. By 4 p.m., he realized that the loser son-in-law he had mocked for years hadn't just moved out. He had pulled the rug out from under the entire family's lifestyle. Back at the house, Derek was meeting with a team of forensic accountants. They were sitting at the same kitchen table where Lillian had thrown the water just 12 hours earlier. Derek's demeanor was unchanged, calm, intelligent, and controlled. He wasn't interested in a messy legal battle. He was interested in a surgical extraction. He handed a folder to his lead counsel, a woman who specialized in high-net-worth dissolutions. Inside were the records of Lillian's unattributed capital gains, bonuses she had hidden in offshore accounts. Thinking Derek was too tech-illiterate to track them, she hadn't realized that the freelance consulting he did for sovereign wealth funds meant he had backdoor access to the very banking protocols she used to hide her money. "She's going to fight the eviction," the lawyer noted, flipping through the trust documents. "She'll claim the house is marital property, regardless of the trust structure." Derek took a slow sip of his water, his eyes fixed on the empty pitcher on the counter. "Let her try," he replied softly. The trust didn't just purchase the house. It leased the land from a secondary corporation that owns the entire cul-de-sac. If she claims marital rights to the structure, she'll find herself owing ground rent to a company that charges $50,000 a month for the privilege of standing on its soil. It's a legal poison pill she signed when we did the kitchen remodel 3 years ago. The brilliance of Derek's revenge was its invisibility. He hadn't broken any laws. He had simply enforced the ones Lillian and her family thought they were above. He had used the very tools of the elite contracts, clauses, and corporate layers to create a cage they had walked into willingly. As evening fell, Derek received a frantic text from Lillian. It wasn't an apology. It was a demand. "You can't do this, Derek. I have nothing. Marcus's place is a dump. My parents are losing their minds. If you don't fix this, I'm going to the press. I'll tell them you're a fraud, that you've been hiding money for years." Derek didn't reply. Instead, he forwarded the text to his legal team to be added to the growing file of harassment and attempted extortion. He knew the press wouldn't listen to a disgraced marketing executive with a documented history of workplace misconduct and infidelity. In the age of digital reputation, Lillian was already a ghost. Her LinkedIn profile was being scrubbed by the firm's IT department, and her professional network was distancing itself with the speed of light. By the second day, Lillian's sister, Sarah, who lived for social status and digital validation, had organized a charity gala months in advance. It was the social event of the season, and Lillian had planned to use it as her coming-out party with Marcus. Despite the chaos of the previous 48 hours, Lillian insisted they attend. She believed that if she could just maintain the appearance of wealth and power, she could somehow manifest it back into existence. She spent her last few $1,000s on a dress, convinced that Marcus would stand by her as long as the cameras were flashing. The gala was held at a prestigious museum downtown. As Lillian and Marcus walked up the red carpet, they were met not with flashes, but with a chilling silence. The news of the marketing firm's collapse and the rumors of Lillian's indiscretions had traveled faster than she anticipated. People she had considered close friends turned their heads as she passed. Marcus, sensing the sinking ship, began to physically distance himself from her, his eyes scanning the room for a more viable host to attach himself to. In the middle of the silent auction, the museum's director stepped onto the small stage. He thanked the donors and then announced a special surprise. He introduced the gala's primary benefactor, the man whose recent, massive endowment had saved the museum's classical wing from closure. Derek walked onto the stage, not in his usual unassuming polo shirt, but in a bespoke navy suit that screamed quiet, undeniable authority. The room gasped. Lillian stood frozen, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. This was the man she had called worthless. This was the man she had treated like a servant. Derek didn't look at her. He spoke to the crowd about the importance of integrity, stewardship, and the responsibility that comes with true wealth. He didn't mention her name, but every word was a serrated edge aimed at her soul. He spoke about how true power is silent, and how those who feel the need to belittle others to feel big are usually the smallest people in the room. As he finished his speech, the museum director announced that as part of Derek's endowment, he had requested a transparency audit of all affiliated corporate partners, including Lillian's former marketing firm. The explosion wasn't loud. It was the sound of 100 whispers starting at once. Lillian tried to flee the room, but she tripped over the hem of her expensive dress, the fabric tearing as she fell toward the floor. Marcus didn't reach out to catch her. Instead, he took the opportunity to slip away into the crowd, leaving her sprawled on the marble, a broken queen in a ruined kingdom. It was the ultimate choice that would destroy her. She had chosen the spotlight, and now it was burning her alive. The weeks that followed were a slow, agonizing crawl for Lillian. The divorce proceeded with a terrifying efficiency. Because Derek had documented Marcus's use of marital funds, the dinners, the gifts, the travel, the court ordered a reimbursement of the marital estate. Lillian didn't just walk away with nothing. She walked away with a court-ordered debt to Derek that would take her decades to pay off. Her parents, Arthur and Lydia, were forced to downsize to a small condo in a retirement community they had once mocked. Arthur took a job as a starter at a public golf course, a bitter irony that saw him standing in the sun all day, watching men like Derek play the game he could no longer afford. Marcus disappeared entirely, surfacing months later on the social media profile of a wealthy widow in another state, repeating the same cycle of parasitic behavior until he, too, was eventually discarded. He was a footnote in a story that had always been about the man he underestimated. Derek, meanwhile, returned to his quiet life, but with a newfound sense of freedom. He sold the house that had been the site of his humiliation, donating the proceeds to a charity that supported victims of domestic and emotional abuse. He moved to a modest but beautiful estate in the mountains, where the only water that hit his face in the morning was the cool, natural mist of the high-altitude air. He continued his work, managing the billions of the world's elite with the same steady hand and patient heart. But he never forgot the lesson of the empty pitcher. The moral of this story is one that resonates across time and culture. Never mistake silence for weakness, and never assume that the person serving you doesn't have the power to dismantle your world. We often walk through life evaluating people based on what they can do for us, or what they look like on the surface. But true power is an internal flame, fueled by character and tempered by patience. When we treat others with cruelty and disdain, we aren't just revealing who they are. We are revealing the cracks in our own foundation. Lillian thought she was the architect of her own destiny, but she forgot that an architect is nothing without a solid ground to build upon. As we close this story, we invite you to reflect on the directs in your own life. The quiet ones, the workers, the ones who don't seek the spotlight but keep the world turning. Perhaps it is time we offer them a towel instead of a pitcher of cold water. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being part of our community. Please share your thoughts on Derek's journey in the comments below. Do you think his revenge was too cold? Or was it exactly what Lillian deserved? We look forward to seeing your debates. Until next time, stay safe, stay kind, and remember that the truth always finds its way to the light. Take care of yourselves,